A mother's love should be a shelter, not a weapon. And when it becomes the latter, even the gentlest daughter learns to fight back. The roar of the engine was deafening, a high-pitched growl of pure luxury that shook the windows of our suburban home and rattled the china in the cabinet I had polished just that morning. Outside, in the middle of our snow-dusted driveway, sat a pristine, pearl-white range Rover wrapped in a massive red velvet bough that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My younger sister, Brooke, was screaming, that particular shriek of hers that had dominated the Vance household for 24 years, her face flushed with a manic kind of joy as she clutched the leather-bound key fob to her chest like it was a newborn baby. My mother, Diane, was crying, not the quiet, private tears of someone moved by genuine emotion, but the theatrical cascade of someone performing joy for an invisible audience. Her hands were clasped under her chin, her manicured nails, French tips renewed every 2 weeks at a salon I had never been to, catching the winter sunlight as she watched her golden child climb into the driver's seat of a vehicle that cost more than I would make in 3 years. It's $130,000, Brooke. Only the best for my little angel. Mom squealed, her breath turning to white clouds in the cold morning air. She said it loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She always did. I stood on the porch, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my thin, 5-year-old coat. The hem had started to fray last month, but I hadn't had time to fix it. In my right hand, I felt the jagged, cheap plastic of my own gift. A $3 keychain from the Shell gas station down the road. It was a tacky, neon pink flamingo with a missing eye and a price tag that the cashier had forgotten to remove. The plastic was already starting to separate from the metal ring. It was the kind of gift someone bought at the last minute, standing in line, remembering only then that they had a daughter who needed something wrapped and placed under the tree. "Merry Christmas, Callie," Mom had said that morning, barely glancing up from Brooke's mountain of designer boxes, stacked like an architectural marvel in our living room. She had tossed it at me, without wrapping, without a card, without even the pretense of caring. I had opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she was already shrieking at the sight of the Range Rover. My father, Arthur, was in the driveway, looking like a man trying very hard to understand a world that no longer made sense to him. He had that expression I'd learned to recognize years ago, the look of a man realizing his wife had spent money they didn't have. A mother's love is a map, I whispered to myself, remembering something I'd read once. But some mothers only draw the roads for the children they like. The injustice wasn't just a sting. It was a cold, hard weight settling into my bones, pressing down on everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, everything I had become to this family. For 3 years, I had been the one working double shifts at the family real estate office. I was the one who managed the books for our 12 rental houses, every lease agreement, every tenant complaint, every property tax bill. I was the one who made sure the taxes were paid on time, who negotiated with contractors, who handled the endless stream of administrative details that kept our family's financial empire from crumbling. Brooke hadn't worked a single day in her life. She had spent the last year finding herself in Europe on Mom's credit card. Italy, France, Greece, 3 months in each, staying in 5-star hotels, eating at Michelin-starred restaurants, taking selfies with architecture that mattered more to her than the person funding her journey ever would. When she came back, she brought home a Prada bag, a deeper tan, and absolutely nothing else of value. I looked down at the pink flamingo in my hand. Its remaining eye stared up at me with a kind of accusation, as if to say, "This is what you're worth. This is all you've ever been worth to them. What the hell just happened?" I whispered under my breath later, that evening, my voice trembling not from the cold, but from the raw, jagged edges of a heart breaking for the 1,000th time. I sat in my small bedroom, barely larger than a closet, positioned at the back of the house where I wouldn't disturb anyone with my presence, and watched the security camera footage I had installed 6 months earlier. Brooke was in the driveway, surrounded by friends, revving the Range Rover's engine. The exhaust filled the air with the smell of expensive gasoline and my own wasted efforts. She looked happy, genuinely, unapologetically happy. My name is Callie Elizabeth Vance. I am 24 years old, and in my family, I am the ghost. I am the one who keeps the lights on. I am the one who remembers birthdays, though no one remembers mine. I am the one who cleans up the messes, both literal and financial. My parents, Diane and Arthur, treat me like a high-functioning appliance, something that is only noticed when it stops working and something to be taken for granted when it does. This Christmas was supposed to be different. For the past 3 years, I had been orchestrating a quiet financial resurrection. When I first took over the books for Vance Properties, the business was hemorrhaging money. We owned 12 residential properties scattered across the county, all inherited from my paternal grandfather, a man who had actually understood the value of hard work and fair business practices. By the time my parents took control, these properties were being managed like a child managing a trust fund, with no strategy, no accountability, and no awareness of how quickly liquid assets could evaporate. I had changed all of that. Within the first year, I had audited every lease agreement, renegotiated unfavorable terms, upgraded appliances to justify higher rents, and filled every vacancy with carefully selected tenants. The properties that had been generating barely $45,000 a month were now bringing in nearly $85,000. Within 2 years, I had established a capital reserve fund, refinanced 3 mortgages at better rates, and hired a professional property maintenance company that actually showed up when called. By the end of the 3rd year, Vance Properties had become profitable in a way my parents had never imagined. We were looking at 7-figure annual income. The family that had been struggling to make mortgage payments was suddenly wealthy. I thought that by saving the family legacy, I would finally earn a seat at the table. I thought I would finally be seen as a daughter, not a servant. Instead, I got a $3 keychain. And Brooke got a Range Rover that cost $130,000, a price tag that had suddenly made my father's face go ashen at breakfast this morning when he overheard Mom on the phone with the dealership. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The blue light reflected in my eyes, highlighting the dark circles I had earned working for them for free. I looked at the master ledger for Vance Properties, the one that only I had access to, the one my parents were too lazy or too incompetent to maintain themselves. And I made a decision. It wasn't an angry decision. Not yet. It was cold. It was precise. It was the decision of someone who had just realized that she had been playing the wrong game with the wrong people. I pulled up a file I had created 6 months earlier, back when the first seeds of doubt had begun to take root. A file labeled Active Equity Control Clause. It was buried in the business bylaws, the ones my parents had signed when they inherited the company but never actually read. The clause stated that if the majority of the properties were being managed by a single member for more than 3 years without compensation, that member could claim active equity control in the event of a financial crisis. My mother's predatory decision to take out a high-interest loan against the 12th house, the only property we weren't renting out, the one supposed to be my future home, had officially triggered that crisis. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to be methodical. I was going to be smart. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you mistake a ghost for nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, I made my arrangements with the precision of someone planning a surgical strike. The first person I needed was Mr. Benjamin Sterling, the real estate agent who had been working with my parents for years. Sterling was a man who smelled like expensive cigars and desperation, the kind of man who understood that in business, Loyalty was a transaction, not a virtue. I called him on December 27th, my voice professional and calm. Mr. Sterling, I need to discuss the 12th house with you. My mother has mentioned she'd like to move the sale forward. Ah, Callie, he said, his voice oily and familiar. Yes, your mother has been quite insistent, very anxious to close. But there's a complication. What kind of complication? A secondary lien has appeared on the title, something that will need to be resolved before we can proceed. It appears to be a claim for unpaid wages. Do you know anything about this? I smiled to myself. I had filed that lien 6 months ago, back when I was still hopeful, still thinking that my family might eventually acknowledge what I was doing. It was my insurance policy, my quiet protest, my one-woman union negotiating for a wage that would never come. I know exactly what it is, Mr. Sterling, I said, and I know exactly how to resolve it. Over the next hour, I laid out my plan with perfect clarity. I would create a shell company, funded by liquidating my personal savings, money I had earned through freelance accounting work done late into the night, work my parents didn't even know about. This company would purchase the 12th house, removing the financial threat my mother had created and the lien I had placed. In exchange, I offered Sterling a significant consultation fee. Not a bribe, never a bribe, a fee for his professional discretion and his willingness to keep the transaction private until the closing date. But Callie, Sterling said, hesitation creeping into his voice, this seems complicated. Your mother will not need to know until the closing is complete, I said, at which point the lien will have been satisfied, the house will have been transferred to my company, and the immediate financial crisis will have been averted. My father will be protected. My mother will have her breathing room. Everyone wins. It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie wrapped in a layer of technical truth that Sterling was smart enough to recognize and greedy enough to accept. He hesitated for exactly 5 seconds before accepting the fee. Greed, I was learning, was a powerful motivator, more powerful than loyalty, more powerful than family, more powerful than truth. The week between Christmas and New Year's was a study in controlled chaos. My mother was on a spending spree, her confidence buoyed by the false certainty that the house sale would close by the end of the week. She bought Brooke a set of diamond earrings to match the car. She ordered a new custom sofa for the living room that she had been eyeing for months. She spoke with the tone of someone who had finally won the lottery, not realizing she was already spending the winnings of a game that no longer belonged to her. My father was beginning to show signs of stress. He wasn't a particularly intelligent man, but he was intelligent enough to know that the numbers didn't add up. Over dinner on December 30th, he voiced his concerns. "Diane, are you sure about this?" he asked, his fork clinking nervously against his plate. "Sterling hasn't sent over the final documents yet, and I don't understand how we can afford all these purchases. Sterling said the buyer wants to keep things private until the end." My mother said, the fork in her hand scraping against her china with an unpleasant sound. "It's a high-profile investor, very discreet, and Callie seems to be handling everything just fine." I sat there, eating my salad in silence, feeling like I was watching a movie of my own life. I saw Brooke laughing, texting her friends, showing off videos of the Range Rover. I saw my mother preening, already planning her next purchases. I saw my father worrying, his hands fidgeting with his napkin, sensing a storm coming but unable to see its shape. None of them looked at me. Not really. To them, I was just the background noise of their success, the invisible machinery that made their lives possible. "Callie, pass the salt," Brooke demanded, not even looking up from her phone. I picked up the salt shaker. As I handed it to her, I noticed the $3 keychain sitting on the table next to her designer handbag. She had repurposed it, using it to hold her new gym locker key. It looked pathetic there, a piece of trash sitting next to luxury goods, a symbol of every moment I had been considered unworthy. "Here you go, Brooke," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "Enjoy it while it lasts." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, frowning. "The salt," I said. "It's bad for your heart." January 5th arrived with the kind of cold that made the world feel brittle and sharp. I woke up early, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit I had bought months ago for exactly this moment. The suit was expensive, not luxury level, but better quality than anything else in my closet. I did my hair in a sleek bun and applied a dark, bold lipstick that my mother would have called severe and unsuitable for a young woman. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I didn't look like a ghost anymore. I looked like someone who was about to take control of her own narrative. I walked downstairs. The kitchen was empty except for a note from Mom. Took Brooke to get her hair done for the celebration dinner. "See you at the office at 4 p.m. with the check. Don't be late." I crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling bin. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was expecting me to deliver the money that would destroy her. I drove to Sterling's office, a sleek, glass-fronted building downtown that smelled like the kind of wealth that didn't quite earn itself. When I walked in, Sterling was waiting for me in the conference room. He looked nervous, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds, his forehead already beaded with sweat despite the overly aggressive air conditioning. "Is everything ready, Callie?" he asked, wiping his brow. "It is," I said, sitting down and opening my briefcase with deliberate calm. "Do you have the final closing statement?" He slid a thick folder toward me. "The buyer is in the next room. They've already signed their portion." I opened the folder, and my heart skipped a beat. There, in the official paperwork, was the name of the buyer. Phoenix Holdings, LLC, a shell company I had created 6 months ago, funded by every penny of freelance work I had ever done, every penny I had saved instead of asking my parents for help. I had become my own buyer. I signed the papers with a steady hand. Every stroke of the pen felt like a chain snapping, like a lock opening, like a door closing on the old version of myself. "Now," I said, looking up at Sterling, "when do my parents find out?" The notification of transfer was sent to their email 5 minutes ago, Sterling said, his voice trembling. "The physical notification, the official transfer documents, won't be delivered to the house until this afternoon, as we discussed." "Perfect," I said. "Now, let's talk about the 11 other houses." Sterling's face went pale. I leaned back in my chair, and for the first time since Christmas morning, I smiled. According to the bylaws of Vance Properties, since the 12th house has been purchased by Phoenix Holdings, a company that I control, I now have the legal authority to claim active equity control over the remaining 11 properties. This means I have the right to audit the entire portfolio for any mismanagement or unauthorized financial activity. "Callie," Sterling started, but I raised my hand. "I've already found evidence of embezzlement," I continued, my voice ice cold. "Specifically, my mother moved $130,000 from the company accounts to purchase a Range Rover for my sister. This is fraud, and as the new controlling entity of this company, I am officially freezing all company accounts pending a full financial audit." Sterling looked like he was going to vomit. "What happens now?" he asked. "What happens now is that you help me save this company from a predatory loan," I said. "You're a hero, Mr. Sterling, a professional who protected his clients' interests. The consulting fee I paid you covers the work you've done. No one needs to know about any of this unless you decide to tell them." The implication was clear. I walked out of the office at 3:45 p.m. I went to a small coffee shop 3 blocks away and ordered a hot chocolate. I watched the clock. At 4 p.m. exactly, my mother called. I let it ring and then blocked her number. Then I blocked my father's. Then I blocked Brooks. I took a sip of my hot chocolate, and for the first time since Christmas morning, I felt something like peace. The difficult spirit was finally at rest. I decided to drive by the office just to see it. I parked across the street, hidden behind a large delivery truck, and watched the chaos unfold like a scene from a tragedy I had written myself. My mother's car was parked haphazardly on the sidewalk. Through the glass window of the office, I could see her screaming at the empty chair where I usually sat. My father was there too, looking pale and clutching his chest. Brooke was standing by the door, her face contorted in a mask of confusion and rage. They looked like three people who had just realized the ground had vanished beneath them. Sterling had done his job beautifully. He had waited until the closing day, today, to notify them that the property had already been transferred 5 days ago under a preemptive right of first refusal clause I had triggered. The official transfer documents had just arrived at their home. My mother had lost the house, and with it, she had lost the money to pay for Brooks' Range Rover. I watched as a Range Rover dealership representative arrived at the office at 4:30 p.m. I watched as my mother's face went from rage to panic to something that looked almost like madness. The dealership had come to reclaim the vehicle. The payment she had promised had never arrived, and her credit, her financial credibility, was no longer something banks would extend to her. I watched as my mother threw something across the room. A stapler, maybe, or a phone. I watched as my father's shoulders slumped as the weight of the real situation finally settled on him. I felt a twinge of sadness, but it was quickly replaced by the memory of the $3 keychain. They had spent 24 years treating me like I was expendable. They had spent years telling me I was ungrateful, that I was difficult, that I was hard to please. They had made me feel like my desire for basic acknowledgement was a character flaw. Well, I was finally showing them what I was grateful for. I was grateful for my own intelligence. I was grateful for my own hard work. And I was grateful that I was no longer a Vance in spirit, even if the name remained on my driver's license. I stayed at a hotel that night. The silence of a room that didn't smell like my mother's perfume or my father's disappointment was like a balm on a wound I didn't know I could heal. The next morning, I went to the 12th house. It was a beautiful 2-story colonial on the edge of town, positioned on 3 acres of property that had once felt like a dream. I had spent weeks looking at it over the past 6 months, imagining what it could become if it was mine. Now, I held the deed. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. This was mine. Every board, every window, every inch of land. I had bought it with the equity I had earned through 3 years of unpaid labor. It was a fair trade, perhaps the only fair thing that had happened in my family in decades. As I stood in the kitchen, looking out at the overgrown garden, my phone buzzed. It was an email from my father. I had blocked his calls, but I hadn't blocked his email yet. Callie, please. I don't know what you've done, but your mother is in a state. The car dealership came this morning and took Brooks' SUV. Brooke is devastated. Sterling says you're the one who bought the house. How could you do this to us? We're your family. We love you. Please come home and let's fix this. We love you. The words felt like a slap in the face. They didn't love me. They loved the work I did. They loved the sturdy daughter who kept their world spinning while they pretended to be something more than they were. I typed a response. I'm not coming home, Dad. I'm already home. You'll find the audit of the company accounts in the office mail. I suggest you get a lawyer. You're going to need one to explain the $130,000 gift to the IRS. Your wife committed fraud. You benefited from that fraud. That makes you legally culpable. I gave you 3 years to notice what was happening. You chose not to see. That's your mistake, not mine. Callie. I hit send and felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, but something closer to clarity. I wasn't the one who had broken this family. I was just the one who had finally stopped holding the pieces together. The real fun began a week later. Since I now had legal, active equity control, I sent a formal notice to my parents that they were being removed as officers of Vance Properties due to financial mismanagement and fraud. I hired a professional property management firm to take over the 11 rental properties. I sent formal notification to all tenants that future rental payments were to be made to Phoenix Holdings, LLC. Within 48 hours, my parents' personal income, the monthly draw they had been taking from the company, vanished overnight. They went from earning $15,000 a month to earning nothing. My father tried to find employment, but no one in the local business community would hire someone with an embezzlement scandal attached to his name. My mother tried to sell jewelry, tried to take out personal loans, tried everything except for what would have actually helped, admitting fault and asking for forgiveness. They tried to sue me, of course. They hired a cheap lawyer from 2 counties over who tried to argue that I had coerced Sterling and manipulated the bylaws. But I had every document, every email, every text message. And most damning of all, I had recordings. I had been recording my mother for 2 years. Every conversation in which she admitted to moving money illegally. Every laugh she laughed about hiding money from Dad. Every time she called me her little slave, or her workhorse, or her useful idiot. I had nearly 400 hours of audio evidence. During the first deposition, held in a sterile conference room with both of our lawyers present, my mother sat across from me. She looked older than I remembered, the Botox that usually kept her face smooth, having worn off weeks ago. Her eyes had the wild, desperate look of someone who had finally realized that money couldn't buy their way out of consequences. "You're a monster, Callie," she hissed, leaning over the table with such venom that even her own lawyer recoiled. "We gave you everything. We gave you a name. We raised you. You gave me a $3 keychain, Mom," I said quietly, pulling the flamingo out of my bag. I had brought it with me, and I placed it on the table between us. "This is what my life was worth to you. And this," I said, pointing to the audit papers before me, "is what your life is worth to the bank. I think we're even." My lawyer, a sharp woman named Mrs. Gable, played the recordings of my mother laughing about the shell game she was playing with the rental income. My father looked like he was going to have a stroke. You could see the moment the reality of what he'd allowed to happen, what he'd benefited from, settled on him like a weight. "Diane, you told me the 12th house was clear," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Oh, shut up, Arthur," she snapped, the mask of the society wife finally slipping away. "I did it for Brooke. I did it for this family. Callie is just a jealous, bitter brat who wants to see us suffer." "I don't want you to suffer, Mom," I said quietly, and I meant it. "I just want you to be honest. For once in your life." The judge overseeing the case didn't need to deliberate for long. The bylaws were unambiguous, and the evidence of embezzlement was overwhelming. My parents were ordered to repay the company $130,000, money they didn't have and couldn't possibly earn. To settle the debt, they had to sell their own home. The big suburban house with the driveway where the Range Rover had once sat gleaming in the Christmas morning sun, a monument to favoritism and cruelty. They moved into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the wrong side of town. Brooke had to get a job at a fast food restaurant to help pay the rent. She hated every second of it. She would call me from different numbers, sobbing and begging for money. "Callie, please, I can't live like this. It's so unfair." "Life is unfair, Brooke," I told her once before hanging up. "Some people get a Range Rover for Christmas. Some people get a keychain and years of unpaid labor. You're finally learning which one you are. 2 months after they moved, my mother showed up at my house. I saw her on the security camera before she even approached the gate. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed. Her clothes were wrinkled. In her hands, she was carrying a large, heavy-looking bag. I opened the intercom. "What do you want, Mom?" She looked up at the camera, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before. Desperation. Pure, unfiltered desperation. "You think you've won?" she screamed. "You think you can just take our life and walk away? I'm your mother. I brought you into this world, and you've spent the last 24 years trying to take me out of it." I said calmly, "Go home, Mom, or I'll call the police." "I'm not going anywhere," she screamed. She reached into the bag and pulled out a gallon of gasoline. "If I can't have this house, no one can." My heart hammered in my chest, but I stayed calm. I had prepared for this too. For 3 months after taking control of the property, I had installed every security measure I could imagine. Cameras, motion sensors, a direct line to the police station. "Mom, look at the camera," I said, pointing to the small black lens near the gate. "That's a direct feed to the police station. There's a patrol car stationed 2 minutes away. If you pour that gas, you're going to prison for arson. Is that what you want? To spend the rest of your life in a cell because you're mad about a house?" She froze, the gasoline canister hovering over the ground. I watched as she looked at the camera, then back at the house, my house, then at the gasoline in her hands. For a moment, I saw the woman who used to tuck me in at night and tell me I was sturdy like it was a compliment. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Then the madness returned. "You did this. You pushed me to this," she screamed, and she started pouring the gasoline on the porch. The sirens sounded in the distance. Red and blue lights began to reflect off her face, making her look like a demon caught in an inferno of her own making. She dropped the canister and tried to run, but the police were too fast. They tackled her on the lawn. My lawn. The lawn that had cost me everything and was now worth everything. As they were putting her in the back of the patrol car, my father and Brooke pulled up in a beat-up old sedan. They watched in silent horror as Diane was driven away, her face pressed against the police car window, screaming incoherently. Arthur looked up at me, standing in the window of the house. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked empty, hollowed out. He knew it was over. The Vance name had been destroyed. The money was gone. The power was gone. All that remained was the wreckage. I closed the window and drew the curtains. Diane was sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility for attempted arson and domestic disturbance. The embezzlement charges were settled through the loss of their home, but the reputational damage was permanent. My father stopped talking to me entirely. He went to work as a security guard, a job he hated, a job that paid barely enough to keep him and Brooke in their cramped apartment. He aged 10 years in the 6 months after my mother's arrest. Brooke surprised me. After Mom went to jail, something shifted in her. She could have called me daily, begging for money, begging to come home. Instead, she stayed at her job. She realized that no one was coming to save her anymore. She moved into a small studio apartment, renting 1 bedroom and subletting the other to make ends meet. She stopped calling me for money. I didn't reach out to her. Not yet. I wasn't ready to be a sister. Maybe I never would be. But I watched from a distance, and I saw something I had never seen in Brooke before. Effort. Real, genuine effort. I focused on my own life. I renovated the 12th house, turning it from an investment property into a sanctuary. I expanded Phoenix Holdings, eventually purchasing 6 more properties by the end of the year. I became known in the industry as someone who was tough but fair. I never forgot where I came from, though. Every Christmas, I would buy 100 $3 flamingo keychains and donate them to a local shelter for runaway teens. Alongside each keychain, I would include a handwritten note and a check for $500. I wanted them to know that their worth wasn't defined by what was under the tree. Their worth was defined by the fire inside them, the ability to survive, the refusal to break. Everything was going perfectly until a Tuesday in November, exactly 1 year after Christmas. I was sitting in my office when a woman I didn't recognize walked in. She was older, maybe in her 60s, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older sorrows. Her eyes were tired in a way I recognized. "Are you Callie Vance?" she asked. "I am," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. She sat down slowly and placed a thick folder on my desk. "My name is Martha Sterling. I'm the ex-wife of Benjamin Sterling." My blood went cold. "Is something wrong?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in her face. "My ex-husband passed away last week," she said quietly. "A heart attack. He was only 62. While I was going through his private files, I found this." She opened the folder. Inside was a second closing statement for the 12th house. It was dated the same day as the one I had received, but the buyer's name was different. It was Diane Vance. "What is this?" I whispered, though I already knew. Some part of me had always known that Sterling was too corrupt to work for just one party. "My husband was playing both sides," Martha said. "He took your money for the transaction, but he also took a secret payment from your mother. They created a reversionary trust. If you ever sell that house, or if anything happens to you, the ownership reverts back to her. It's set up so that the reversal happens automatically, regardless of her incarceration status." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "That can't be legal," I said. "It's ironclad," Martha continued. "My husband was a terrible man, but he was a brilliant lawyer. He built in a bad faith clause. If you try to challenge it, the entire property portfolio, all your houses, could be tied up in litigation for a decade. Your mother would have nothing, but neither would you. It would be scorched earth." I felt something rising in my chest. Not panic, rage. Pure, clean rage. Even from a prison cell, my mother was trying to keep her hooks in me. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Martha looked at me with a soft, tired smile. "Because I know what it's like to be trapped by people who are supposed to love you, and because I want you to know that there's a loophole." A loophole. The trust only exists as long as the Vance Properties entity exists. If you dissolve the company and transfer all assets to a new, unrelated corporation, the reversionary trust becomes null and void. It was written to apply only to Vance Properties specifically. I felt something like hope, fragile and dangerous. "But I can't dissolve the company without my father's signature," I said. "He's still a 20% shareholder." "Then you better find a way to get him to sign," Martha said, standing up, "because your mother gets out of jail in 3 weeks, and she's already planning her homecoming. She's been making calls, asking other inmates about property law. She thinks that trust is her ticket back to wealth and revenge." She walked to the door, then paused. "One more thing," she said. "My husband kept detailed records. I'm giving you copies of everything. Use it if you need to. Sometimes the truth is the only weapon that works." After she left, I sat alone in my office with the documents of my own undoing spread before me. I had 3 weeks to get my father to sign over his shares. 3 weeks before the woman who tried to burn my house down came back to claim it. I found my father at his security job. He was sitting in a small booth at a construction site, looking at a black and white television that was playing some game show he didn't care about. "Dad," I said, walking up to the booth. He looked up, and for just a second, I saw a flicker of the man he used to be. Then his eyes clouded over with something that looked like shame. "What do you want, Callie? Haven't you taken enough?" he asked, but his voice lacked any real anger. It was just tired. "I need you to sign these papers," I said, placing the dissolution forms on the counter. "Mom set a trap. She's trying to take everything back. If she succeeds, the IRS will come after you for unpaid taxes on the trust. You'll go to jail too." He laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound, like something breaking. "Let them take it. I have nothing left anyway. I'm just a guy in a booth, Callie, a guy who looks at a television all day and pretends he's not a coward. You're the one with the big house and the fancy life. Why should I help you?" "Because I'm your daughter," I said, and my voice cracked despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Because for 24 years, I was the only one who actually took care of you. Brooke didn't care. Mom didn't care. I was the one who made sure you were fed and your taxes were paid. I was the one who listened to your stories about your father, who kept the business he built from crumbling. Doesn't any of that mean anything?" He looked at the papers, then back at me. His eyes were wet, but I don't think he realized it. "It meant I didn't have to be a man," he said quietly. "It meant I could be lazy because you were sturdy. You weren't a daughter, Callie. You were a crutch. And now that you've kicked the crutch away, I'm just falling. I've been falling for a year, and I don't know how to stop." I left the papers on the counter and walked away. I couldn't force him to sign. I had learned long ago that you can't force people to see you. You can only show up and hope they eventually look. 2 weeks passed. No word from Dad. I spent those days in a fever of legal research. I prepared the paperwork for the new corporation, Phoenix Holdings Incorporated. I had the transfer documents ready. All I needed was that one signature. I couldn't sleep. I would lie awake at night, thinking about my mother in prison, thinking about her planning, thinking about her hunger for revenge. I thought about the reversionary trust, designed like a trap waiting to spring. On the day my mother was scheduled for release, I sat in my living room watching the security cameras. My security team was stationed at the end of the driveway. I had hired armed guards, legitimate security professionals, people trained in crisis management. I was ready for her to come. What I wasn't ready for was what actually happened. At 10 a.m., a taxi pulled up to the gate. It wasn't my mother. It was Brooke. She stepped out of the car slowly, like someone carrying a weight. She looked exhausted, older than her years, worn down by the reality of making her own way in the world. She walked up to the gate and pressed the intercom. I opened it remotely. She came inside, and the first thing I noticed was that she was crying. "She's out," Brooke said, her voice trembling. "She's at the apartment. She's screaming about her house. She has a copy of the trust papers, Callie. She's completely unhinged. She has a locksmith. She's coming here." "Where's Dad?" I asked. Brooke reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "He gave me this. He told me to give it to you. He said he was going to go stay with his brother in Arizona. He said he didn't want to be around for what comes next." I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside were the signed dissolution papers, and beneath them, a handwritten note in my father's careful script. "Callie, I'm sorry I wasn't the father you deserved. I'm sorry I let your mother make decisions that hurt you. I'm sorry I was too weak to stand up for what was right. I can't fix what I've done, but I can give you this. Dissolve the company. Free yourself. Don't let her win. Don't let her into your life again. Not ever. Be the woman I wasn't strong enough to be. With love and regret, Dad." I held the letter, and for the first time since this all began, I let myself cry. I didn't have time for tears. I called my lawyer immediately. "Gable, we have the signature. File the dissolution now." I want the company gone, and the assets transferred to Phoenix Holdings before noon. I'm on it, she said. I'll have the paperwork filed within the hour. You'll be completely protected. I looked at Brooke. She was standing in my foyer, looking around at the beautiful house she had almost cost me, her eyes red from crying. Why did you come? I asked. You could have just sent the letter. Because she's crazy, Callie, Brooke said, and fresh tears started streaming down her face. She's not a mother anymore. She's not even a person. She's just rage in human form. She wanted me to help her break in here. She said we'd be rich again. But I've been working, Callie. I've been making my own money. It's not much, but it's mine. I don't want her money. I don't want to live like we used to. I want a sister. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was no longer the golden child. She was no longer the favored one. She was just a girl who had learned, too late, that love isn't measured in expensive gifts. Stay here, I said. Stay in the guest room. The security team won't let her pass the gate. At 11:55 a.m., the gate intercom buzzed. I looked at the security monitor and saw her. My mother stood at the gate, and she looked like she had been transformed by her time in prison. She was thinner, harder, older. Her hair had gone gray, but her eyes were still burning with that same intensity, that same hunger. She had a locksmith with her, and in her hands she held the reversionary trust documents like they were a winning lottery ticket. Open up, Callie, she shrieked. The house is mine. I have the paperwork. Sterling made sure of it. I walked down the driveway, my heart pounding, but my face a mask of calm. I reached the gate and looked her in the eye through the bars. The house isn't yours, Mom, I said quietly. I have the trust, she yelled, waving the papers. It says if the 12th house is sold or transferred, the ownership reverts to me. That's true, I said, but the trust only applies to Vance Properties. And as of 11 minutes ago, Vance Properties no longer exists. It has been legally dissolved. I watched the color drain from her face. What? You can't. Arthur would never sign. He did, I said. He's in Arizona. He's finally free. The locksmith, realizing he was in the middle of a legal war he wanted no part of, packed up his tools and left. My mother grabbed the bars of the gate, and her hands were shaking. You can't do this. I'm your mother. I'm the reason you have anything. No, I said, I'm the reason you had anything. For years, I was the one who kept the houses, the money, and your reputation intact. But you decided a $130,000 SUV was more important than your daughter. You decided a $3 keychain was all I was worth. And you decided that even after I took everything, you still couldn't let me go. I pulled the flamingo keychain from my pocket. It had become something sacred to me, a symbol of everything I had survived. This is the only thing I have left of yours, Mom, and you can have it back. I dropped it on the ground outside the gate. She screamed and reached for it, but the security guards were already moving her away from the property. I watched her through the security cameras for an hour. She sat on the sidewalk, screaming and crying, until the police finally came and told her she had to move. She was trespassing on private property. She was violating the terms of her parole. She needed to go. She looked so small sitting there on the concrete, so pathetic. The woman who had ruled my life with an iron fist and a silk handkerchief was now just another homeless person on a street, begging for something that would never be hers again. I turned off the monitor. When I turned around, Brooke was standing in the doorway. She had been watching too. Is she gone? Brooke asked. She's gone, I said. We stood in silence for a long time. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it wasn't a hostile one either. It was the silence of two people who had finally stopped waiting to be saved and had started learning how to save themselves. What happens now? Brooke asked. Now, I said, I keep working. I have a company to build, properties to manage, a life to live. And you have a shift at the diner tomorrow, don't you? She nodded. 6 a.m. I've been promoted to assistant manager. I get health insurance and everything. Then you better get some sleep, I said. I walked her to the guest room. As I was closing the door, she whispered, Callie, I'm sorry about the car. I really didn't know. I know, I said. Good night, Brooke. Good night, Callie. The following months were a whirlwind of growth and transformation. Phoenix Holdings expanded rapidly. I purchased 3 more properties by the end of the year. My company became known in the real estate industry as professional, ethical, and ruthlessly efficient. People wanted to work with me. People trusted me. It was intoxicating after years of being invisible. I became a mentor to young women entering the business world, teaching them how to read a ledger and, more importantly, how to read people, how to recognize when someone was lying to you, how to protect yourself. My mother never tried to come back. She moved to another state with the meager settlement she received from the final liquidation of her personal assets. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was still telling people she was betrayed by her ungrateful children, but no one listened anymore. The story had been told. The truth had been recorded and documented. She was just a woman in a small apartment in a town where no one knew her name, and that was a kind of death all its own. My father stayed in Arizona. We exchanged postcards occasionally. He sent me a photograph of himself standing in front of the Grand Canyon, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. He looked happy. On the back of the postcard, he had written, "It's bigger than I thought. Just like you." It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, Brooke, and I found our way to a tentative peace. We saw each other once a month for coffee. She had been promoted to manager of her diner by the end of the year. She had bought her own car, a used, reliable Honda sedan that she maintained meticulously. She was proud of it. There was no Range Rover, no diamond earrings, no imported designer clothes. Just a young woman building a life on her own terms. I was proud of her. As for me, I still lived in the 12th house. I renovated the kitchen with professional appliances and marble countertops. I turned the master bedroom into a sanctuary of light and peace, with windows that overlooked the gardens I had spent months learning to cultivate. I learned that I loved gardening. Who knew? Every Christmas morning, I wake up early and walk down to the driveway. I look at the spot where the Range Rover once sat, gleaming in the Christmas morning sun, a monument to a love that had never really existed. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel like a ghost. I feel like a woman who reclaimed her own story. I reach into my pocket and feel my keys. They are attached to a simple, high-quality leather fob. Nothing fancy, nothing that screams of wealth or status, just something functional and beautiful in its simplicity. But inside my desk, in a small velvet box, lies the pink flamingo keychain. Its remaining eye still stares upward, still accusatory, still honest. It's the most valuable thing I own, not because of what it cost, $3 from a gas station cashier who barely looked at me, but because of what it bought me. It bought me my worth. It bought me my freedom. It bought me the knowledge that love should never require you to disappear. It bought me the understanding that sometimes the smallest gesture of cruelty is the thing that finally teaches you how to stand. I am Callie Elizabeth Vance. I am 26 years old now. I own a company that generates over 7 figures a year. I own a beautiful home. I have a sister who is learning slowly what sisterhood means. And I am finally completely, entirely home. not because I returned to the place I came from, but because I finally became the person I was always meant to be, the person who had been hidden beneath years of service, beneath layers of pain, beneath a $3 keychain that was supposed to remind me I was worth nothing. I was worth everything all along. I just had to burn my old life down to see it. If you've made it this far, you understand. Respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by a $130,000 Range Rover or a $3 keychain. Your value isn't determined by who gets the credit or where a toxic family places you on their seating chart. Silence is a weapon, and patience is power. To those gaslit into invisibility, your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. Your silence isn't weakness. It's the start of your revolution. You are finally deciding to write your own ending. Subscribe to turn humiliation into triumph. Your worth was only ever waiting to be remembered. Have you ever had to prove your value to a family that underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.